when I came into this, I saw this as like my baby. It was something that we nurtured, we grew, and we wanted to make sure that it grew to be a very, very healthy, happy incorporation. And at the time that I came on, there were 7 people there. The first chairman was Kahukotua, and he lived here in Nelson. There was Uncle Wakatu, there was Dr. Sinclair, Doc Sinclair. Then there was Magui, he's the only original, aren't you? And Eva Rickard, I see you're her granddaughter here. And they were people who had exactly that same sort of passion. To work in a city like Nelson was really coming into a really hot area, because there was an opinion from the original people who lived in Motueka that they weren't going to have Māori come in and run their town. If it came to that, they were going to move it 7 k's up the road and rebuild a new one. Nelson was going to reclaim the waters and build their city out there in what was part of the sea, because they just could not abide the thought that Māori would come in and have a degree of authority over what they had considered was theirs. And so trying to work in that environment was particularly difficult. We were fortunate to have at that time our secretary Brian Yates, who was West Yates, etc. And for the last 30 years they have been a very strong influence in the way that Wakatu has grown and been developed. Brian brought to our board a wealth of wisdom in that he knew how people in Nelson worked, he knew what was happening everywhere in it, and he certainly knew how to run the money side of things. We had to deal with things like people objecting to having a rent increase. So for 21 years there was a rent out there that I remember it being around $200 for 21 years. And then the renewal time came around and it went from 200 to 700 and something, and all hell broke loose in old Motueka and Nelson. And they believed that the land was theirs, it wasn't for us to come in. But what they wouldn't acknowledge was it was legislation that was dictating the term about how much money they would have to pay. And often we would have elderly people who were renting properties coming and pleading poverty and expecting that we would reduce the rent because they were old and they'd lived on it for 40 years and we shouldn't come in and do this to them. What they didn't acknowledge was that I represented my father-in-law, who was exactly the same age as him then. And for all of the years that he had owned it, he'd only had a pittance, because the Māori Land Court administered the lease. They took from the miserable 4.5% of the unimproved value their costs, and you got whatever they determined was left. But Māori had no idea of what it was that they owned. And those were some of the handicaps that we had to work with. So when we had a meeting, we'd come down here on a Friday afternoon. I worked as a cashier clerk at home, so I'd have to get somebody in to work for me and fly down here, and we'd start our meetings at about 5 o'clock and we'd go through to about 11 or 1 in the morning, and then we'd get up at 7:30 and be back in the office at 8 o'clock and go through to whatever time it took us to finish the business. And if we had to go back Sunday, we did that too. Then we all went back and did our work. And the going was really, really tough. We didn't only just have to pay for the people we employed, we had to, abandon our families. And when I think back to it, it was the passion that kept us there. And I don't for one moment regret that, because along with that came the opportunity to make change. And Wakatu, for all of these years, has made changes that make you feel proud. It makes you realise that you've helped to start to create a taonga that will live for a long, long time if it's looked after properly. And one of the things I don't like about today's society, and I see it a lot, is that people tend to look at an asset and see it as a commodity. And they will push the value of that right to the limit. And when, excuse the pun, but when the shit is, well, you've lost it. What I'd like to believe is that this asset is always revered and honoured as being a taonga, a gift from your ancestors that you need to nurture, you need to look after, and you need to continue to own. Don't sell it, don't gamble it, it's too valuable. And so there's so much history that comes from having worked with this incorporation. You know, you have a passion for being Māori. You have a passion for knowing that if you'd had a better opportunity in the first place, the quality of the lives that our children and grandchildren and a lot of people that we know would have been far, far superior. But because the authority for our own economic base was taken away from us, our people are in real strife. And, you know, our opportunity to help educate you guys it's got to be a must. And one of the things that I'd like to believe, like Paul said, was that you don't forget where you came from, because it's the people at home that keep you grounded, they keep you honest, and if you can handle them, you can handle anything. You know, I mean, we know from experience that, you know, working in mainstream is a piece of cake. It ain't hard at all because there's a process. Working for Māori, anything is an excuse not to. And the reason for that is sometimes they're so scared because they've been so, you know, done by other people. They're too frightened to believe that somebody can be honest. And so if you can work at home, you can work anywhere. So give it a go and don't walk, because if you can look after that, you can look after yourselves and your family, and you can take along the values that our people have instilled into us and get the passion. Because being Māori is uniquely ours. We can't get it anywhere else. And so, yeah, working for Wakatu has been an absolutely wonderful opportunity. I just think that if any of you aspire to helping you to putting your names forward at some later date for the board, take along the passion, because you get more back than you gave.